Hi, it's Dr. Costello with a quick explanation of FDA approved versus off-label use of medications. You're hearing about hydroxychloroquine and Plaquenil and Zithromax and other drugs being described for possible treatments for COVID infections, and the FDA jumped in pretty quick to say these are off-label or not FDA approved uses. So what happens with any drug that comes to market is it goes through an extensive testing process that the FDA oversees. It could take $1 billion to bring a new drug to market and take several years. As an example, if I developed a new antibiotic and I knew that antibiotic killed strep, pneumo, and mycoplasma and Haemophilus influenza bacteria, and those are sinus bacteria, I could try to get an FDA approval. So I would do tens of thousands of patients and not only have to prove that the medication was effective to treat sinus infections, but as importantly, that it was a safe medication. At the end of that, if the FDA was comfortable that my data showed that the medication was successful in treating the infection, sinus infection, and that it did not have significant risk factors associated with it, I would hopefully gain FDA approval or FDA indication to treat sinus infection. As a physician, if I saw you with an ear infection or bronchitis and I said, boy, those bacteria that cause sinus infections are the same bacteria that cause ear infections or bronchitis or pneumonia, I might use that antibiotic to treat a bronchitis infection or ear infection, and then technically that would be an off-label indication because I did not use it for sinus infection. I used it for something else. So with my medical judgment, I knew the medication was safe and that it should treat other infections. And this becomes the norm with many medications, that they're approved for one condition and they are used for other conditions. And it's well established that those are good treatments, but the manufacturer never goes back and gets FDA approval for ear infection or bronchitis, because that would cause them hundreds of millions of dollars to generate another study to show that it was effective in bronchitis. So they may just leave it as a indication for sinus infection, and everybody knows that it's appropriate to use in other conditions. The FDA labeling on what is indicated or approved is very, very specific. So as an example, a drug called Singulair first came out as an asthma medication, and the manufacturer, when they did their initial testing, gave everybody in the trial the medication at bedtime. The medication received FDA approval to treat asthma, but in the package insert, it very clearly said that the medication should be dosed at bedtime. So if I gave you this medication for asthma and said take it in the morning, I technically would be giving you a off-label use of the medication. That really didn't go over well and was awkward for the drug, so they went back later and proved that the medication was effective for allergies as well. And when they did the studies, they knew that downside to the original testing, and they gave the medication at different times of day. They did get the FDA approval or indication for that drug to treat allergies, and it did not have the specific labeling criteria to say that it was required to take at a specific time of day. So the FDA is very, very specific, very stringent on not only is the drug safe, but is the drug effective, and they also review with a fine-tooth comb how the study was done, and specifically if there's anything like taking at bedtime. Now, that same medication originally came out in adults only, and the FDA approved use was in adults. So if you were 17 and a half, that was an off-label use of the medication. The manufacturer went back later and got testing in younger children down to age of 2, and they now have FDA indication in children and adults. So FDA approval is great, FDA indication is great, but you also have to take it with a grain of salt, and you have to understand what you're using the drug for and if it makes clinical sense. I'm going to talk in part 2 about the specifics of these 2 other medications that they're talking about for COVID infection and how this applies.